Good morning, Year 9. We're doing quadratic equations in the form of ax squared equals c. So before we start, let's think about our procedures, what we've done so far. So if I skip right to the back, I know this might shine through. If we've had something like 3x equals 6, to get that we just divided both sides by 3, and we found that x was 2. With what we're learning today is if we have x squared equals 36, we would square root both sides. The square root would get rid of the square, and the square root of 36 would be 6. Okay, so that's what we're doing, just square rooting. That is what essentially the skill that we are learning today. However, what we'll learn a little bit later is this is not 100% accurate and is a little bit more complex than that. But if everyone can just understand the procedure that we're learning today is square rooting, and then it will give us different answers, then you are definitely halfway there. Okay, that's the most important thing that you need to understand, is that we're square rooting today because you have things in the form of x squared. So, that's the most important thing. A quadratic equation is one in which the highest power of a pronumeral, a letter, is 2. So usually it's in the form of something like this. Ax squared equals c. Or if we're using some numbers, 2 x squared equals 72. Now, if we were to try to find this, okay, if we were just ignoring this squared and it was just 2x equals 72, we would do our first step of dividing both sides by 2. So let's just quickly do that. Let's try and solve this quadratic. If we divide both sides by 2, we end up with x squared equals 36. And if we square root both sides, x equals 6. So therefore we're just finding our solution. We're just square rooting. But we have to get the x by itself, the x squared by itself, before we can square root. Okay, so if we're happy with that we're just square rooting, then let's get into a little bit more nitty-gritty of this. Let's try and do it a little bit harder. Now, there are 3 types of quadratics. That is, when we square root, we can have different solutions. And I'm going to have my calculator handy to help you along here. If we have something like this, x squared equals a number that can be square rooted, okay? So 9. If we were to square root both sides, that would cancel out. So it would be left, the square would be cancelled out, so we're left with x equals 3. Now the problem here is really, if we squared 3, if we had 3 squared, that would equal 9. If we put that in our calculator, let's bring it across so you guys can see, 3 squared equals 9, okay? But, if we had negative 3 in brackets, because we're squaring that whole thing, negative 3 squared also equals 9. So we've got a little bit of a complex issue here. If we square root 9, really, there's the bell. If we square root 9, really there should be 2 solutions. There should be 3, and there should be negative 3. So what we're saying here is, in fact, the square root of 9 is not just positive 3. It's positive 3 and negative 3. Because both of those numbers squared gives us 9. So square rooting them should give us 2 solutions. So what we're going to say with this one is we are going to say it has 2 solutions. And they are positive 3 and negative 3. So this type of quadratic has 2 solutions. 2 answers, if you will. A positive and negative of the same number. And it would be the same for, let's say, if we did the square root of 36, what we did before. So x squared equals square root of 36, x would be plus and minus 6, because plus 6 squared would give us 36, and negative 6 squared would give us 36. And in case you don't believe me, let's put that in. Negative 6 times negative 6 gives positive 36. So therefore, this one has definitely two solutions. Now, let's look at this. X squared equals 0. Now, in this situation, if we square root both sides, square root of 0 equals 0. What that tells me is x must equal 0, but can it equal any other number? No, it can't. It can only equal 0. 0 times 0, or if you square root that, is going to equal 0. So what that tells us, in this specific type of quadratic, it has one solution, one answer. That is that x equals 0. Now the last one we're going to look at is x squared equals negative 9. So I've got 9 up here and negative 9 down here. Now with the square root of negative 9, you cannot square root a negative number. It has no solution. If I was to square root both sides, and I'm going to put that in my calculator, let's say x, will give me that stuff, square root of negative 9. Let's see what happens. Maths error. It cannot be done. There is no solution for this. This is impossible. So x cannot equal anything. There's no way this could be calculated or computed. So what we're going to say here is there is no solution for this type of quadratic with a negative number. So these are the three types of quadratics that we have. Okay, three types of quadratics. We have one with two solutions, which can be just, a number, or any positive number. Then we can have a quadratic with one solution, that is with 0. And then we can have quadratics with no solutions, or no solution, when there is a negative number, square root of a negative number. Okay, so we should be happy with that. The last thing is leaving in surd form. If we have a number just here that doesn't doesn't square root easily, so it's your 9, your 36s, your 64s, your 81s, they go into numbers that are quite easy. If you've got something like, let's say, x squared equals 17, if we square root both sides, that'll give us x. If we put this in our calculator, we're going to end up with something very ugly. Let's put that in. Square root of 17, 4.123105626. Okay, and I assume it keeps going. It's very ugly. Actually, let me just turn this off and let it correct. There we go. So the way we want to leave it in is we want to leave things in a surd form. What that means is square root form. So we're leaving stuff as a square root. So we're going to leave this as a square root of 17. Now it looks like it's half done, and it kind of is, but this is much more accurate than getting this number and rounding it. If we round this number, then it's not 100% accurate. We've rounded it. Let's say if we round it 2 decimal places, that means all these numbers that could influence a very, very big number are now diminished and now gone, and that doesn't give us a sense of accuracy. If we leave something like this that actually kind of looks neater than all these numbers, then this is neater and it's 100% accurate. It looks like we should do the operation, but we're going to leave it in surd form, leave it in our square root form. That's so when the question asks for surd form, or maybe even exact form, that's exactly that answer, it means leave it in this form with a square root around it. Okay. Let's do some questions. So, find all possible solutions for the following equations. Okay, so we're just trying to find how many solutions there are and what they are. So if we have x squared equals 25, we square root both sides. that'll just give us x on this side. The square root of 25, well, that would be positive 5 and negative 5. So we're going to have two solutions there. So that will be plus and minus 5. And we can check that. 5 squared equals 25. And if we put this in brackets, negative 5 squared also equals 25. So we have our two solutions there. So that's positive and negative 5. Now with something like this, we're going to actually get the x squared by itself before we square root both sides. So just here, let's divide both sides by 2. It'll be x squared on this side equals 9. If we square root both sides, that'll give us x equals plus and minus 3. Because they both add up to 9, or both square to 9. Okay, and this one, 1/5 equals x squared over 20. Sometimes this is written as x squared over 5 equals 20. These are the same thing. They've just put the x squared to the side. So they've treated this fraction as a coefficient rather than writing the x squared on top. Okay, these are the same thing, just to help you along. But let's just stick with what they gave us in here. If we times both sides by 5, it'll cancel out that fraction. So we'll be left with x squared. 20 times 5 should be 100. Just double check that. Yes, it is. And the square root of 100, we're going to square it both sides. So x will equal plus and minus 10. And let's just double check that. 10 times 10 equals 100. Negative 10 squared also equals 100. So yes, it is plus and minus 10. Now, we're going to leave these in surd form. So find all the possible solutions. Now, we actually did this prior, so I'm just going to do that one really quickly. We square root both sides, x equals the square root of 17. Okay, just leave it in surd form, leave it in square root form. Okay, this one, we want to get the x squared by itself before we square it, or square root it, sorry. So we're going to divide both sides by 3. My brain's a little fuzzy today, so I'm actually going to do that with my calculator. 7. I thought it was, but I wanted to check. And then I square root both sides. X equals the square root of 7. Oh! I have just thought of something that I want to do. Actually, I missed this prior, sorry. Is that just here, this should also be plus and minus. And same here. Because if we take the square root of 7, and it's this, okay? That's our answer. If we get our answer and square it, it should give us 7. But if we also had that, let's type it back in again. If we have negative answer, let's see if we can do this, squared, this also equals 7. What this tells us is, whatever that decimal is, it doesn't really matter, we actually need to put pluses and minuses in front of our surds as well, because it is the plus and minuses of those decimal numbers, those ugly numbers. If we have plus versions and minus versions of them and we square them, then we both equal up with our 7 and our 17. So this may not be the best way of explaining it, but you can also think about this, is that it should be the plus and minus versions of those numbers. Okay? So just to make sure, I'll do the 17 as well. The square root of 17 equals that. If we get that number, answer, and we square it, we should end up with 17. So that was the positive values. Now, square root of 17 again. Let's go bracket, answer, square. This should be 17, positive 17 as well. And it is. Okay, so whatever those decimals are, we're not writing all those decimals out, but we are saying this exact form of all those decimals. If we take the minus values of that decimal and square it, we're going to end up with 17. If we take the positive values of those decimals and square it, then we're going to end up with 17. So we need to put the plus and minuses out the front. Sorry I didn't explain that before. Okay. Last 4 examples. Let's get through these. Find the exact solutions where possible. Okay, now these is more of your equations. And this is not that complex. If we want to get the x squared by itself, we're going to plus 64 to both sides. If I can write. So that'll be x squared equals 64. And then we want to square root both sides. Oh, I'm going to have to write it across. Sorry, guys. So it'll be x squared root of 64 is going to be plus and minus 8. Because positive 8 squared gives us 64, negative 8 squared gives us 64. Okay, this one we have to leave in third form. Minus 7 to both sides. X squared equals negative 7. Oh, we got a problem here. If we square root both sides, the square root of negative 7 will give us no solution. So let's just test that. Maths error. Okay? So we can say the answer here is there is no solution. So where possible, as it says, find the exact solutions where possible. This one has no solution. So that is your answer. Do not be scared of the fact that you got a maths error. That is the correct methodology. Don't be intimidated by it. Let's look at this. We've got 3x squared minus 5 equals 7. X squared is greater than 0. Okay, so what this little part here, this comma, is this is like a side note. That x must be a positive value. We might end up with 2 solutions, but we can only choose one, and it has to be the positive one. X is greater than 0, x must be positive. So let's go through. We want to plus 5 to begin with. So it'll be 3x squared equals 12. Or divide both sides by 3. So that'll be x squared equals 4. And if we square root both sides, x will equal plus and minus 2. Now, that's all well and good, but according to the parameters of our answer, x must be greater than 2. So we're going to go, therefore, x equals 2 because x must be greater than 0. Okay? The negative 2 isn't our solution. It cannot be accepted. So it's asking you to do this last little step. That is what this means. Okay? Do not give me a negative answer. That's what it's saying. Okay, last one. Oi, they made this ugly. I am going to plus x squared to both sides to make this positive, and then I might switch both sides. So plus x squared might be a little bit more work, but then I can ensure I get it right. 13 equals x squared plus 3. Now I'm just going to switch both sides. Switch sides. Usually you wouldn't write that, but I'm just explaining what to you guys what I'm doing, so you're not confused. And they're going to minus 3. And the x squared equals 10. Okay, what are my parameters here? X must be less than 0. Okay then. So let's square root both sides. It's going to end up with a third form. X equals plus and minus the square root of 10. Now, according to this, it must be less than 0. So it must be our minus value. So it's not going to be the square root of positive 10. It will be x equals the square root, the negative value of the square root of 10. Because whatever that number is, let's put that in. Minus 10, it's negative 3.16, whatever that is. But that is less than 0. If I just said the positive version, that number is above 0. So that cannot be our solution. Okay? So this would be our answer. I know it's a little bit hard, all the stuff I've dumped on you, but like I said before at the very, very start of the video, essentially you are just square rooting something. Okay, that's the procedure you're learning. But you are understanding that sometimes things have two solutions, one solution or no solutions, and sometimes you need to leave it in surd form, that is square root form. And that can have a plus and minus. So there is a lot to take in. You might feel overwhelmed, and that's totally justified. But if you can just walk away that this is the procedure, and then you just work up your understanding from there, I'd be very, very happy with that. Okay, good luck with your exercise.